So, Olek, would you define yourself as a romance reader or watcher? And do you watch much romance?
Reader, for sure not. Watcher, neither. But I would say I'm an occasional romance watcher. So if you invite me to a cinema to watch a movie, I would say no romance for me. But I would watch one when I eat a dinner alone.
That makes sense. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales of Our Times. This is a show where we discuss the stories that move us, what makes them so meaningful, and why others could or should find meaning in them as well. This is not a spoiler-free show, so bear that in mind as you continue to listen. We tackle books, movies, comics, and more. Where there's a story, there's a reason to read or watch for today's story. There we go. You're joining us at the tail end of our spicy summer theme, where we are digging into romance, the themes, the preconceptions, and why we just can't quit these stories even when they might want to make us roll our eyes. So here to help me close it out is my good friend and fellow RTI host, Olek Shyn.
Hi everyone. I'm Olek.
Welcome
so
back.
happy to be here.
Yeah, you actually did come on one time.
Feels like it's been many moons back.
Yeah, it does. It feels like it's been a long time. Is there anything you would like to say to introduce yourself?
Well, I mean, your regular listeners might know me already.
Mm-hmm.
I'm your colleague from
the
English service. I host a program called In Taiwan We Speak, where we introduce Taiwan's linguistic diversity. Mm-hmm. And I'm also the editor of RTI's Ukrainian language service.
Mm-hmm. So Olek often has a lot of very intriguing guests on, kind of discussing like the politics of language.
Yes.
And that's very fascinating to me. So if you haven't, definitely go look it up. But today we're talking about a totally different kind of like politics, like relationship politics, I guess. So we are actually going to talk about not one, but two movies today. It's a double feature to close out Spicy Summer. Now, Olek, what stories have you brought for us today? Could you tell us the name of those movies?
So today I brought to you two BL movies, boys love, or, well, I don't know, queer love, LGBTQ.
Yeah.
There's many ways to call this theme, but, well, I do enjoy an occasional romance movie. These two, however, are slightly different, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later. One of them is called God's Own Country. It's from the UK, and it's a gay story. And there's another gay story I brought. It's from Taiwan, actually. And
yeah, it's our very own boys love movie.
It's called Your Name Engraved Herein.
Now, right before we get into those summaries, Olek, are there any like themes or tropes that you see in either God's Own Country or Your Name Engraved Herein?
Well, I think in both of these, but of course larger in the gay love category. We have obviously homophobia, social pressure, and the issue of coming out or not doing so. And in this case, of course, we have this theme present in both movies.
Yeah, this will be fun.
Well, another thing to mention, though, they're both sad. It's like, romance movies are sad.
Well,
queer
it's the
themed
drama.
Movies are sad, but these two are.
It is true, but it does feel like a lot of like the queer romance. It's like the drama comes from like a deep sadness, and like perhaps that's reflective. There's a bunch of different reasons why that could be, but it is kind of sad in an overall way that remains a theme in so many like queer love movies. It's just this like deep sorrow. Can't we just have love, baby? That's a big question, I guess, but
yeah, that's a very big question.
We can't answer that one today. What we can do is give you a summary of each of these movies real quick. So the first one we're going to do is Your Name Engraved Herein.
Yeah, so this movie made rounds in Taiwan. I know people who watched it like 30 more times. There were unofficial fan clubs.
Oh my God. So for everyone out there, I always recommend you go watch the movies. I will say for both of these, they are in our spicy summer category. There is sexual content in them. If you're uncomfortable with that, just like be aware as we move ahead. Though obviously we're on the radio, so we're not going to get too spicy with it. This first movie is from Taiwan, directed by Patrick Kuang-hui from 2020. So can you give us a summary of Your Name Engraved Herein?
Yeah, it's a story that happened in late 1980s in a high school. Two teenagers, boys, fall in love with each other. They don't fully realize it themselves. And of course, they perhaps were in doubt still whether they are normal kids or abnormal, gays.
The quote, strong friendship between them.
Exactly. And then, of course, one of them is less reluctant to sort of embrace whatever they were having between the two of them. It was simply friendship, but then it sort of gets into the situation where one of them actually chooses to date a girl. And
out of
it goes
love
from
or
there.
out of like social pressure? Do you think?
I think social pressure, of course, family pressure and all that. And
like maybe there is like friendship there, fondness, but it's definitely not the same thing that they're feeling for this boy.
Yeah, and it's quite reflective of, I think, of what actually happens in real life, especially back then. I mean, it's end of martial law in Taiwan.
Well, and something, we forgot to mention this, but it is important. They're going to a religious school, like or they're taught by a priest at least.
I actually forgot that fact.
You did?
It's very important.
So anyway, so one of them starts dating a girl, which I have to imagine is heartbreaking for the other boy.
And he starts acting out. And he sort of adopts this personality where he's like, I don't care about anything in this world because anyways, this boy, I can have him. But then none of this is spoken out because it sort of gives us the sense that perhaps both of these boys are still not realizing what it is actually. And they're dealing with it as any other teenager would do.
They're just acting out.
Exactly.
They don't have words for what is making them so frustrated.
Exactly. And then, of course, it gets heated, and then there's this one fighting scene, I think, at least one.
There's at least one.
Sexual scene.
They get into, like, an entanglement. They have a sexual encounter.
And then sort of it never works out.
Maybe it was too much.
Well, I think that's the story they want to tell us, that no, it didn't work out. And I guess it doesn't really in real life in many cases. One of the boys just accepted, it's just sort of a path of any other straight boy. Do you remember what happened to Birdie?
So from what I remember when I was reading about it, the first boy, it's the one who was dating a girl, his friend, Jahan, gets married. And I think he has a kid. But he gets married. But it doesn't last. Because we actually follow Birdie and their teacher, who was a priest, dies. This is like much later when they're adults, their teacher dies. And he goes to the funeral in Canada. And when he goes there, he realizes that his priest was actually also a gay man because he runs into his priest lover, who was like, yeah, he couldn't really accept his identity, which broke my heart, which Birdie can empathize with. And he's like, so he kind of turned to religion instead. Birdie.
Wait, hold up. I don't remember any of this.
Really?
What? Was it in the same movie? Did I
know.
watch like a Netflix cut down version? But also, maybe I just lost my attention once I realized there's no happy ending.
But they do. So this is the thing where it goes to like a question mark happy ending. Because then, I don't remember how, but he finds out from like Jahan, his wife. He calls his wife, who's like, yeah, I haven't seen him. We broke up. I think she knows he's gay, but she's like not going to tell anybody. And then Birdie runs into Jahan outside. And they're like, oh,
that I remember, yeah.
Hey, we're older. We've lived our separate lives, but our feelings haven't left. We're going to walk off together holding hands.
The end.
Fade to black, yeah.
Yeah, that part I remember. And I was like, are we actually going to end the movie here?
Yes.
That's why I think it's
No
not
closure.
a happy ending movie.
I guess, yeah. But the next one, God's Own Country. They have sheep.
Yeah, they have a lot of sheep.
A lot of sheep.
Again, there's been years since I watched this one, but this one I watched at least 3 times.
Okay.
Probably within 1 week.
Oh,
And so the story goes, there's this, so imagine modern day world, but it's happening in a village in a UK, very countryside area, and they have sheep. So this family, they're like farmers, basically, sheep farmers, and their son is supposed to help them out around the farm, watching after the sheep and like bringing them into the mountains and the Brokeback Mountain vibe. No.
Ooh, it's always mountains, isn't it? Isolation is the thing, which actually does play into this movie as well. But exactly. So the son is like he's the one who has to be like hands on the sheep, literally, because the older parents can't do it anymore.
And they're quite old, and it sort of felt like they were very disconnected from him.
He's like physically and emotionally isolated from his family.
And so then he ends up out there with the sheep. So the British guy's name is Johnny. He's adult, by the way, but his parents decide to hire a migrant worker from Romania, Georgi. And so Georgi is supposed to come there and help him with the sheep. And then they do happen to be alone in that hillside, mountainside area. Just them and the sheep. And first, of course, it starts off with a tension. Yeah. Because, well, this Johnny, he's like very...
He also is kind of acting out, isn't he?
Yeah. Like he resents the family, he resents his parents, and the society. Perhaps he also resents his life.
He's like doing drugs, he's having casual sex. He's just not happy with anything he has to do.
And then this guy comes here from like faraway land. He's very good with sheep. His parents think he's very useful. He enjoys it, unlike Johnny. So Georgi is like, he enjoys the time being out there with the sheep, while Johnny hates his life.
Yeah. And then that tension kind of builds into something more when I think this one actually does have fight to sex.
Yes. Yeah. It gets very sweet from there.
The problem after that is that technically Georgi is a migrant worker, so he's not even supposed to stay there.
Yeah. He's supposed to go back at some point.
Yeah, but Johnny obviously wants him to stay there. And from what I remember reading in the summary, the long and short of it is that like Georgi eventually like leaves, but Johnny can't accept that. His dad has a health problem, which then means that Johnny is now left in charge of the farm. Johnny takes over the farm and he's like, listen, I will be in charge of the farm, but we have to do things my way, which means Georgi is coming back and he's going to live with us. And his family's like, well, I mean, we can't do anything. So like, yeah, sure. Yeah. And so then Georgi comes back and they are happy. They live happily together doing sheep stuff.
I think that's where it ends, at least what I remember, but it's very clear they're going to be together. Yeah. You know, it's assumed they'll stay together.
The difference between this one and the last one is that like it is heavily implied that like they're going to live together happily. Yes. At least because of how Johnny settles everything up with his family, where he's like, my way now.
It's more indicative of a happy ending that they don't explicitly show, but like you can treat it as a happy ending. They're not going to give you obviously like a wedding or anything. But,
yeah.
You know, the fact that Your Name Engraved Herein, sort of they show us that these guys, they fell in love so young, but then they spent what, like 20, 30 years apart. And then they see each other and they sort of kind of like let us know that maybe there's going to be something new like for them. Yeah, there's hope. But I mean, there's years lost. And then in the end, they just give us this open ending.
It's like walking away.
Yeah.
It's very much like much more melancholic. Because I guess you can say like the two of them, they don't wrap it up. But the first one, Your Name Engraved Herein, is definitely a lot more like wistful. It's a lot more sorrowful. So let's actually kind of dig into that too, because we mentioned like it doesn't feel like a lot of these LGBT films, but for our conversation today, a lot of like boys' love films get that happy ending, especially not in the same way that a lot of straight romance films do. Can you speak to that, or do you think that that's a trend you also see?
Yeah, that's definitely a trend, but I also think that it's because the romance when it comes to like straight couples and gay couples, it's a very different thing, because cinema portrays something that is more normal to us, right? And by the word normal here, I mean we're more used to.
Like so a lived experience,
exactly.
Perhaps.
So for straight people, of course, a more representative case would be where people are, happy in the end. They have, which is not always the case, but they're heading towards that very typical marriage, children,
bright future. Yeah.
at least a wedding. While in gay movies, if they're holding hands in the end of the movie, that's already
It's a win.
Yeah. Most of them tend to represent, of course, they are created in a cinema sort of sub-industry, which caters to, well, either straight audiences or queer audiences, but who know that the situation is actually not as happy in real life. Like there's a whole crisis happening with gay kids, lesbian kids not being able to embrace themselves.
Yeah.
And of course, if we're talking about movies that were shot like 10 and 20 years ago, I think it's almost impossible to find a happy ending queer film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for a long time, like queer coding or even just like explicitly saying somebody was queer meant that they were going to be a villain. Just straight up, they were going to be the bad guy of the film. So then to try and turn these people into protagonists, I think there's the very obvious cultural barrier of like, there are just countries and places that are like, quote, not ready for it. Like it hasn't been there this whole time. But also there's a lot of like little things that maybe people don't realize are queer coding that then you have to try and like deprogram. But I guess speaking back to, again, what we said earlier, that kind of like deep sadness that feels like it runs through like a lot of these like queer films. Something I talked about earlier with another one of my guests was like that movies can also represent what we hope to see in the future, right? So even though now we have a lot of movies that might be reflective, it's also like movies are not reality. So we're the ones who get to control how the story ends. They're not real life. Do you think that there is space, at least in the future, if not right now, but a space for more movies, more queer love movies that have that like picture book happy ending?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the time is now.
Yeah.
Although, of course, not everyone might be ready. But I generally think that when a cinema gets representation for a certain, let's say, demographic group, of course, you don't start with happy endings because you want to first tackle the problems that they have. So you would be representing an average gay couple that's, unhappy because they cannot be themselves, they cannot love each other, they cannot be open. And then you can be more creative and make them superheroes or, turn them into like discoverers of space.
Yeah.
But first you start with something more realistic and something more representative, I think. But today I feel like in certain societies where we do have more or less, LGBTQ rights, I think I would confidently include Taiwan in the list of those countries where we do find ourselves in a place where we can afford happy ending gay films.
Like at least meet you where you're at. Because you were right. Like there's so much importance in just producing a film that's like, I see you. But I think you're also right on the money. Where like there are definitely like there is time and like time and place. Taiwan could definitely do it. Taiwan has certainly produced some like queer comedies in the last like 3 or 4 years that have been quite popular. There's always room for improvement, but like I think that's how it starts. Is like writing queerness into all types of films
and shows. Yeah,
films, shows, books, not making it a buzzword or like a tragedy. So well, we are almost out of time, but Olek, if you were to recommend that somebody watch one of these movies, you can pick which one. What is like the one phrase pitch that you would give them?
One phrase pitch.
Yeah.
I'm very bad with one phrase pitches.
Uh-oh. Well, you can test them out if you want.
Well,
your
but I really wish people watch both of them. Okay. Watch both of them. Watch the sad one first, and maybe you'll find it a little bit happy. And then watch the other one, which is more happy. And But also, since we're in Taiwan, if you watch Your Name Engraved Herein, of course, you'll have that impression of the time in Taiwan's history, the end of the martial law, end of 1980s. I think it's going to be interesting to you, our international audience, from many perspectives, not just the LGBT-themed films, but also a little discourse into Taiwan's history and human rights.
Definitely. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today. So thank you so much for joining me, Olek.
Thank you for having me here.
And thanks to everybody else out there for joining us on, oh my goodness, on Tales of Our Time. So this has been Spicy Summer. So we'll be back to our regular episodes next week, tackling all kinds of genres. So join us next week. This has been Tales of Our Time on Radio Taiwan International. I was your host, Amanda Stevens, and we were discussing both God's Own Country by Francis Lee and Your Name Engraved Herein. 2 Tales of Our Time. We'll see you next time.